Well, hello and welcome to week 4 of EDUC 749. I hope you've had a great week. I was encouraged in reading your discussion posts last week. I was glad to see that so many of you enjoyed the Fat City video with Richard Lavoie and saw just how impactful that was, even though it was dated, and kind of putting ourselves in the shoes of our students who have a learning disability. So I really enjoyed reading those discussion posts, and I look forward to reading your papers that you're submitting today going into more detail on a strategy that you have investigated more. So as we look into week 4, I wanted to just kind of build on something that Kathy shared in this week's discussion post, because she said something, and I think this was in response to a post from Frank. And she referenced a specific part of the Fat City workshop where Lavoie quoted, "Fairness does not mean that everyone gets the same. Fairness means everyone gets what he or she needs." And I thought that was a really important statement that Kathy pulled out of that video. And it made me think of a visual that maybe you've seen, maybe you haven't. And so I thought I would share that with you because I think it really captures the essence of what we've been talking about so far in this course when we think about fairness and equity and meeting kids where they're at. And one of the things that I heard as a special education teacher and administrator, and I'm sure you maybe have heard or maybe at one point in your career even thought, when someone would say to me, well, I can't do that for that student, I can't give him that accommodation because that's not fair. Everyone in the class will want that accommodation. I remember hearing that specifically at the secondary level. When I was a high school teacher, I remember hearing that. So I thought this was a really important statement that Kathy pulled out, and I wanted to show you this visual. So you may have seen this before, but in this first image, you can see really what we're talking about when someone says fair, and everyone should get the same. This is equality. This is, okay, we're going to give everybody the same box, same size box to try to help them see over the fence. But you can see that that meets the needs of two kids in this picture, but that third kid, that fairness doesn't meet his need. So originally, when I first saw this picture, the equivalent was, okay, let's do equity. In this picture, you can see that we are giving each child what they need so that they're being treated equitably. One kid doesn't even need a box. Another kid needs 2 boxes to be able to see over the fence. And so when I first saw this image, this is what it was, and I thought this was really powerful. And then, only recently, did I see the third image that's been added to this, and I think this really captures what we're talking about when we think about universal design for learning and what we need to do as special educators. This picture in the middle, this equity picture, is an after-the-fact accommodation, and some kids need that. This student clearly did need it. In a universal design for learning framework, though, it's really thinking about how do we change the whole environment. So that's what this picture does. In this picture, nobody needs a support. Nobody needs an accommodation because we changed the whole barrier. We removed the barrier. We changed the whole environment so that it met the needs of all of the kids trying to see this baseball game. And so I thought this was really powerful, and when I saw Kathy's post, it made me think of this visual. I've used this in presentations before, and maybe you'll find some use for it in your work, but I just think it really captures what we're trying to get at. Yes, sometimes kids need accommodations in that middle picture, but ideally what we're looking at is how do we change the whole environment so that it's more like that picture on the right, where kids don't need that support or accommodation anymore because the environment is conducive to all learners. As we think about week 4 and what you're going to work on this week, it's packed with a lot of different disabilities. When you think about kids with emotional behavioral disabilities, kids with intellectual disabilities, kids with attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, students with autism spectrum disorder, there is so much meat. There are whole courses that are offered in each one of these disability categories, and so it doesn't seem like we're doing it much justice to cover all of those in 1 week, but this is a course that's really designed to kind of give you that overview perspective. So what I have focused on this week is really the behavioral components, and so when I looked at these 4 disability categories, one thing that often comes up across these disabilities is behavioral needs. And so as you look at the videos this week and some of the links that I provided in the module, it's really focused around researched, evidence-based practices centered around kids with behavioral disabilities or behavioral needs, because I think you'll be able to use some of those strategies in any of these 4 disability categories. You'll see there's a Swift video that what it really does is the Swift video challenges me because it really does make me think about inclusion. And in this video, when they say they're including all kids, they really are including all kids. And so how they have adapted the classroom, how they're using assessments and talking about assessments to change strategies and change interventions for kids. I think it just kind of summarizes a whole school that's aligned around meeting the needs of all kids. So as I watch that video, there are parts of it that I think I've been in meetings similar to that, or we've got some processes similar to that in schools that I've been a part of, but I don't know that we've ever done it to the level that they are. So that video really challenged me in some areas that we can do better. And then, as I said, kind of focusing around evidence-based interventions. There is the longer video this week is a presentation from the National Center on Intensive Intervention, and they really go into detail about evidence-based practices centered around behavior. And the reason I'm focusing on that is a couple of you in your papers or your comments last week referenced that you really want to learn more about, okay, what are those interventions that go in an IEP, or what might I do for students that I'm serving that have special education needs? And so as you think about what a behavior plan might look like or behavioral aspects of an IEP, I felt like this presentation really gave you a good overview of some behavioral practices. And I think it was John that mentioned in his synthesis paper that he really wanted to know some specific accommodations or interventions, and others of you mentioned that as well. And so I thought this would be a good place to start, specifically focused around behavior. You did some work in the last week on math, reading interventions, and those kinds of things. This is focused around behavior. The other piece that you'll see is there is a link. The presenter references his website and then a link to where you can go research different behavioral interventions and see kind of how those work. And so I've included that there as well. Again, one of the things that you'll hear that he will talk about are things like functional behavior assessments. I'm sure some of you have sat in on FBAs. If not, I'm sure you will, where you really try to figure out what is the function, what's the driver of that behavior. Is it a kid seeking attention? Is it a kid seeking positive reinforcement? Those kinds of things, so that once you know what the function of the behavior is, then you can try to build in meeting that need in a more positive way. The other piece, and this is, I'm seeing this used so much in our classrooms, and especially at the secondary level with check-in, check-out, and the presenter mentions it as an evidence-based practice. If you're not using check-in and check-out, it's a great way to build in reinforcement for students with behavioral needs. And one of the things, and he'll talk about this, is that it is a non-contingent reinforcer. And what that means is the student doesn't have to earn it. The student doesn't have to display the positive behavior to get the reinforcer. We just adjust the environment to meet that student's needs. So check-in, check-out is really good for a student that needs attention. And the function of their behavior is attention, because first thing in the morning, they're meeting with someone, they're getting attention at the very outset of the day, they're getting attention at the very end of the day as they check out. So that's what makes it non-contingent, because again, we're structuring the environment to meet the student's needs. And so as you think about behavior in your classroom, I come back to the tiered model. If less than 80% of students are being successful in your classroom, it's not a student problem. It's a teacher classroom problem. And so as a special educator, sometimes you go into a general education classroom and the teacher will say, we need to have Scott evaluated because his behavior is not good. And when you do an observation in the classroom and you see that, well, lots of students in the classroom's behavior is not where it should be, that's a classroom management problem. That's not a student problem. And so that 80% universal tier 1 expectation is really important, because there's no point in looking at functional behavior assessments or tier 2, tier 3 kind of supports if we're not meeting 80% of our kids' needs at the universal level. So this week there are 2 assignments. There's a discussion that's focused around an article that's posted in Canvas that reviews different types of capital. You're going to dig more deeply into that and connect that to some of your educational experiences. And then there's a case study that's also due this week. There are 3 options posted in Canvas that you can do for a case. You can pick one that you want to do. If you don't want to do in either of those 3, you can come up with your own to make it the most meaningful as possible, either a student that you're working with or something that you've heard about that you want to incorporate into a case study. So you have a lot of flexibility with that. The other piece that I just want to tell you is, if you haven't looked ahead to week 8, I would suggest that you do that, because there is one of the final activities is a second voice presentation, and that assignment references Module 4, because really what you do is you put yourself in a cultural group, and that could be a disability group, that could be one of the other groups that we've talked about, English learners, and you think about what group do you want to put yourself in and represent in the first person format. And so I just wanted to make sure, if you haven't looked ahead to week 8, that you did, because we are halfway through this course and week 8 is going to be here before you know it. So just wanted to point that out for you. If you have any questions this week, feel free to reach out to me. Again, I've enjoyed reading your papers, your discussion posts, and look forward to what you're going to submit this week. Thanks a lot.